Hi, I'm Kayla Hathaway, a partner here at Cimpatico Studios. Cimpatico is a platform dedicated to cultivating conversations and actions on complex social issues with professionals all around the world. On the Climate.Edu channel, I interview academics about university programs, careers, research, internships, and published literature like books and papers. If you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now, on to today's show. Hello everyone and welcome back to Climate.Edu. I am your host, Kayla Hathaway, and today I'm once again joined by Eric Martin. He is the Managing Director of Adaptive Change Advisors, an organization that seeks to democratize leadership, making it possible for anyone, anywhere, to improve their livelihood by more effectively mobilizing people in their organizations, communities, and in their own lives. Today we're continuing our 5-part book series for his book, Your Leadership Moment, Democratizing Leadership in an Age of Authoritarianism. In this episode, Eric details the differences between authority and real leadership, and he also introduces us to John, an activist who organized his community to protect Blair Mountain to illustrate true leadership. And Eric, thank you so much for joining me once again. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm great, Kayla. Thanks for having me back.
All right, and I'm super glad and super stoked to have you back on here. And let's just jump right on into this. So with part 2 of your book, we get introduced to John and all of his activism around Blair Mountain. And I wonder if you can go ahead and give us a bit of a history of like what was going on with this situation and how he, well, one, how you like decided to reach out to him and everything that he told you from his like environmental activism.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking, Kayla, and having a chance to feature and talk about the life of John Gensler. He's an amazing guy, and he's a military veteran of the Second Iraq War. He was deployed multiple times. He was, I believe, a captain of a battalion, a tanker battalion, and was really knee deep in the transition, the training of the Iraqi army to take on a new mission. So really tough job. John was born in West Virginia, and he, is one of these guys that when you meet him, first of all, it's high integrity, but you could see a man who just lived his life in the mountains. And when he came back from Iraq, he found himself at Arlington National Cemetery, and his good friend, who was also a West Virginian, who also went to West Point with him, was being buried that day, Ben Tiffner. So John, the way he tells the story, he looked up, it was a cold day, and he asked himself, why are we burying Ben right now? Now, it had something to do with an IED, improvised explosive device in Iraq that killed Ben. But he said, well, and who financed these IEDs? And these were being financed by the Iranian regime at the time. And of course, the next question was, where did the Iranians get their dollars, their money? And that was, U.S. That was people like you and me who, drive around and buy fuel. I mean, it's just the fossil fuel addiction we all have. And as John says, every time he squeezes the nozzle of the gas pump, he thinks about Ben. So that was a moment for John where he made a choice, and his choice was to try to help, for national security reasons as well, to help this country shift its dependence away from foreign fuel and from fossil fuel altogether, and really launched upon this clean energy path, this passion that he's had and still has. So that's kind of a bit of where John came from. I met him actually as he was a student at Harvard Kennedy School. We spent time in the same class together, and was just really blown away again by his integrity and his insight into what it takes to lead consequential change. So Blair Mountain, you mentioned. So Blair Mountain was the site of one of the most famous battles in American history. It was also one of the bloodiest battles. Over, I think, 2 million rounds of ammunition were fired. This is back in the 1910s. So more rounds fired than even during the Civil War. And and John, when he came back, one of his first choices was to lead a march on Blair Mountain, which is in West Virginia, because the mountain had actually been delisted from the National Historic Places Register so that a coal company could tear it apart. Mountaintop coal removal. It was and still is to some extent a big source of fossil fuel energy in this country. And it was also symbolic. By destroying this place, the coal companies could destroy the history and the legacy of the hundreds of coal miners that were really massacred by mine bosses and their militias who were arrayed on the mountaintops and just picking them off one by one. And most of these miners themselves had fought in World War One, to defend the lives of the people who were now shooting at them. They couldn't imagine killing these people. So that was a march that John made, knowing he'd probably get arrested, knowing that he would actually be detested by the people of West Virginia, many of whom stood by the side as the marchers walked and said, "Eat shit, coalface." So this is to me an example of leadership in that it's not the marching and it's not the follow me kind of thing, but it's the definition of leadership that I offer, and this comes from the work of adaptive leadership, which was developed at Harvard Kennedy School. Leadership is about disappointing your own people at a tolerable pace. Disappointing or disrupting your own people at a tolerable pace. That's what leadership is. And gosh, just think about all the things we're facing in this country right now. And if someone had that kind of wherewithal and seized that moment to exercise that kind of leadership, I think we'd be in a different place. So, I'm happy to say more about John, and there's a lot more to say, but that's kind of the essence of his story as it was told to me, and really how it connects to this idea of democratizing leadership.
And then, getting back into the topic of how we can continue to democratize leadership, there's an acronym that you use in part 2 of your book called DOPE. And I was wondering if you can go ahead and break that down, and why you chose that acronym for one,
Yeah.
and just what it means in relation to leadership.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the single biggest mistakes that everyone makes when it comes to leadership is to confuse or conflate the idea of leadership with the idea of authority. So I'll just talk for a minute about what I mean by authority. So, authority is anyone who has a position of power. It's a boss, it's a supervisor, it's a president, it's if you're a mother or a father, and the expectations that we have of people in authority are pretty much the same thing, regardless of where what kind of position you hold. And then there's 4 of those expectations. So the first one is direction. We want people in authority to tell us, where are we going? And in organizations, that looks like, what's the vision? What's the strategic plan? The speeches that a CEO might give, that kind of leadership narrative, as they call it, mistakenly. So where are we going is the first kind of thing that we want people in authority. And my kids, I have 3 kids. They literally want to know, where are we going? Where are we going for vacation? Do I turn left? Do I turn right? The second expectation and pressure that people in authority experience is to provide a sense of order, calm, giving people roles and responsibilities, job description, structure, what flies around here? How do we behave? These are all questions of order. The third is protection, and that's kind of the obvious one. It's actually the most valuable resource of people in authority. People want to know that they're safe.
Yeah.
They want to know that they're going to have the resources to do their jobs. Their budgets will be protected. They want to know that they'll be physically secure. And then the last thing that we look for people in authority to give us is expertise. Their experience. How many times have you been in a meeting, Kayla, where people say, I've been doing this for 10 years or 20 years, and let me tell you about the time I was here. That's just a guise. It's the way people actually assert authority. And so the idea here, if you're following along, is, when people have authority, we want direction, order, protection, expertise. Where are we going? What's my role? Will I be safe? And do we know what the hell we're doing? And the acronym for that is DOPE, DOPE. And so the idea, it feels good, right? It feels good to know where you're going. It feels good to know that you have the competence to do the job at hand. There's nothing wrong with authority if you can provide it. But the challenge becomes that, and the kinds of issues we face today, like climate change, is it's really hard to say, here's the answer. I know what will solve the problem. I know how to do it. And by the way, you're going to be safe on the other side. Like those, the West Virginians that John grew up with, as we know, and many of these people were going to lose their jobs, lose their sense of professional identity as a coal miner, as we talked about in our last interview. So that disappointment, that disruption, right? That's not what people want. when you're the boss. And so the dope can be really addictive too. We look for it from people at times when they just can't provide it, but they're so accustomed to giving us this clarity, these easy answers, like building a wall, a border wall. Like that's a very typical example. And so it really decapacitates us. We lose our freedom to act. And so then what's leadership? Well, as I say, disappointing your own people is part of it, but it's also about mobilizing people to tackle challenges that have no known or easy answers. And that's again not a space that we want our leaders to say, well, God, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what to do, but let's try this. But if we were honest with ourselves, that's actually what this is about. So I can say more, but I think that's really the one way to think about it. And because we then we give all of our we give all of our attention to people in authority. How much time have you spent looking for guidance from a boss, or looking, watching the president on CNN or whatever it might be? We give them our attention, which is our most valuable resource, really, is who we give our attention to, what we give our attention to. So we give it to them, and then we think that they are the resource. And the same thing's going to happen with Joe Biden coming in. We're looking to him now. He's got it, right? Really? He has a role to play, or a critical role to play, of course. So I get really animated when I think about these things. I'll just maybe stop there for the moment.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. And I think there's definitely a whole conversation to be had about so in the climate, there's always being pushed for silver bullet solutions. If we just geoengineer,
Right.
everything will be fine. And it seems like that same attitude can also be put onto people, seeing oh, well, with Biden being elected, everything will be okay. And it's
Yeah.
no, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's a whole conversation and dissection of silver bullet solutions and people and actual activities that we could definitely have, that's for sure. And with the distinction between true leaders and authority as well, I feel if more people in positions of power were willing to admit no, I just don't know, then it would probably open up conversation for well, it would democratize their leadership because more people would be able to have input and be I might have a thought on this might be a good idea. And I'm curious, with I'm trying to loop this back around to John's experience with Blair and organizing. What kind of struggles that he faced specifically in his community on trying to organize around the protection of this mountain?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so the good news about the mountain story is that actually the National Register of Historic Places decided to relist the mountain as a protected place. So they actually won that battle. But John said he really failed with respect to democratizing that leadership, and it was partly because he didn't engage the people in West Virginia as much as I mean, there were some locals that were there, but it was a lot of people who, maybe people like you and me and people who are listening to this call, which is fine. We have a role to play, but with leadership work, the people with the problem are the problem, and they are the solution. Again, not imposing from the outside. And so as he reflected, he had really, when he came back from the war, he ended up going to Harvard. As I mentioned, he ended up going to MIT, did a joint degree. So he's a kind of a smart guy, and he's a really nice guy. But he said he had entered a really liberal East Coast bubble, and so he started working doing clean energy for military bases, and then for a clean energy company, installing solar. And he said it was easy talking to city managers and say, urban Massachusetts, they got it. But he felt like he had really lost touch with his people. Again, disappointing your own people at a tolerable pace. Mm-hmm. So he made another choice. This is a guy he never fails to surprise me. He abandoned what he'd been doing and started an energy efficiency, kind of a retrofitting, but energy efficiency company in Nashville. So he left the East Coast, moved to Nashville. And part of that was personal and family and, being in a different place. But it was a recognition that he had to be with people who needed to own these solutions, and own it for reasons that might not be what you or I might want. What they weren't necessarily doing it for the environment. They were doing it because they wanted healthy homes, cheaper utility bills. He's working with this kind of hard knuckle builder network now in Nashville on energy efficiency for new homes. And he's doing an amazing job. But his real vision is to create that kind of business. It's called Revive Energy. So that hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses can grow across the Deep South and in Appalachia, where he's from, and have true autonomy and really own this work of energy efficiency to take care of themselves and not be under the thumb of yet another energy giant, which is what happens with these big battery plants. It's great from a electric vehicle perspective, and he said we've been under the thumb of fossil fuel interests, either Iranian or coal interests, for generations in that part of the country. We don't want to do that again. So democratizing leadership too is part of his vision for a clean energy future.
And I have a question in regards to, so we see John is moving forward and like democratizing leadership, and I want to bring in the question of authority again. And you mentioned in a couple parts of the book about like informal authority. And would John like going through and like starting his own company and with these like concerns in mind be like a decent example of informal authority, or like would that be more so now he's like in an actual authoritative position? We can like get a distinction on what you mean by that.
Yeah, you're asking like the adaptive leadership 201 questions here. It's really good, and there's a lot we can get into here. I want to so I think yes, you actually always probably have both in some ways. And some of that is formal authority. It's your job title. I mean, you have a platform, Kayla, right? So that has authority that comes with it and responsibility. In fact, what happens when you have authority, while it's a resource to being able to exercise leadership, is also a huge constraint. Because there may be things you want to say, people you want to talk to, issues you want to get into that maybe people don't expect you to get into. And so that kind of, what I think of it is there's kind of a scope of authority. It's kind of a line that you don't cross unless you want to risk disappointing people. And so I kind of think of that as dancing on the edge of your scope of authority. You're kind of taking a step out, seeing how far can I go. You get some feedback, come back in, and that dance of leadership to me is where it becomes a co-creative act, and you do it with others. You don't dance alone, hopefully. So informal authority is similar to that formal authority of, say, a job description or a job title, but it's not codified. So for example, I think a really good example, maybe it's getting a little bit dated now, but is the idea of being a millennial. When I'm in a meeting and someone says, "Well, as a millennial," instantly you have to pay attention to them. It's a way of taking this informal authority they have as a certain age group and using it to focus attention on an issue that the boomers or others don't want to focus on. So that's to me a good example. Being a woman, being a person of color in a meeting. Not that you want to play that card all the time. But coming from the perspective of a person of color, coming from a woman's perspective, it could be that my favorite example, it's very simple, is there was a guy in my old job who would always fill the cookie. He had a candy jar on his desk, and he'd be the one that put the Starburst and the Snickers and the M&Ms, and people would come by and grab them. I was really bad at that. I love candy, and he kind of created this expectation that would be there for people when they walk by in the morning. So think about leadership is about expectation setting, right? And in that case, a small form of protection, I guess you could say. And that small expectation setting and the norm that was set gave him a platform for people that he otherwise wouldn't have. So he kind of created his own informal authority. So there's different ways. Some of that's just kind of who you are, what you look like, where you were raised, and some of that you can create on your own that doesn't have to be a job title. Because if you're waiting to have enough authority to exercise leadership, maybe it'll take you 20, 30 years to get that. And by then you've become part of the problem.
Wow, okay, that's just like the powerful ending like right there. You become part of the problem then. It's like, oh,
well,
no.
I see it all the time with philanthropists. I think there's a few listening to this call, I know, and they spend 30 years making $1 billion bucks, and then they spend the next 10 years trying to give it away. But by then you've already created the problem. It's too late. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like the I guess to kind of like phrase it a different way, it's like if you can do good now, do it, as opposed to like trying to be like, oh well, once I get X, Y, and Z, I can do good later, right? Like,
and those are small moments that build up over time. I want to leave our listeners with a thought too. If we have a minute, I just want to.
Oh yeah.
If you were planning to wrap up, I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to.
Oh yeah, this will be a good wrap up point. Go, let's do it.
So as I did last time, I invited you to notice these leadership moments, and maybe not do anything about them until we have a chance to really go through the rest of this series and make sure you can survive and not get killed off in the process. So I think for those who are listening, just to take the next couple of weeks to notice your language. You notice when you want to use the word leader. Notice when they talk about leaders in the news or in the newspaper. Just notice that. How does that strike you, just in light of this conversation? And what are they really talking about? Most of the time they're talking about what I talked about before, the direction, order, protection, expertise. It's not really about leadership. It's actually just make me safe, tell me what to do, and so just notice that. And then maybe next time you find yourself using that word leader, stop, pause, notice what you really want from this person, and then try to express that instead. And don't call them leaders. Maybe call them the senior team, the management team, the supervisor, whatever you want to call them. But if we change our language, or just notice the language even, it can gradually shift so that we can see these leadership moments and stop authorizing the wrong people to do the work for us. So that's one kind of practical thought I'll leave for folks, and we can come back to that next week.
Yeah, and with that, thank you again so much for joining me this week. I look forward to having you on next week to continue part 3. Yeah, episode 3 of this series. I'm going to go ahead and roll the end credits, and we'll be right back for a few minutes of post-show chatting.
Thanks, Kayla.